president of the North Louisiana Economic Partnership.
Wanted to ask you, many of the mayoral candidates are talking about, I'm going to get a salesman at City Hall. We're going to go out and sell our city and market our city. Do we need that? And what does that person need to be doing?
I think you need a salesperson just doing Shreveport. But I don't know, as far as you look at the content and the marketing, I don't know what they would do much differently except looking myopically at the city of Shreveport. You know, our staff has relationships. I have relationships in the site selection world that go back over 20 years. If there's a project that's happening in Shreveport or North Louisiana, I'm going to get the phone call. 9 times out of 10, they're going to call me because of having that 20-year relationship. And I've heard some of the candidates talk about going out and talking to companies, and it's more complex than that. It's more than just salesmanship. You've got to make sure that your product is the product that they want, number one, and number two, that they need. It's a process. Economic development is a process of elimination. The two biggest drivers in economic development, we can talk about taxes and business climate and all of those things, is public safety and public education. So unless those two things are being addressed in a meaningful way, then you start at an inherent disadvantage.
Let me follow up. Pretend like I have 100 jobs and I'm looking for a place to bring my business. You're right. I'm going to look at where my employees want to live to raise their families. And if I'm looking at Northwest Louisiana, I'm going to Bossier, Scott.
I look at the whole picture. The Bossier and Shreveport economy, despite what people say, is the same. You can look at the trends, and we did this study a few years ago of the migration of where the employees in Caddo Parish work and where the employees in Bossier Parish work and what jobs they're going to. Predominantly, the out-migration of employees, of residents leaving Bossier City to work in another parish was to Caddo Parish, and they were working in healthcare and manufacturing, which are good jobs, good-paying jobs. If you look at the Caddo residents that are going to Bossier, they're predominantly working in the hospitality sector. So
casinos.
one parish doesn't work without the other.
Right.
You know, we can talk about, and this happens everywhere. I don't care if you're in Minneapolis, St. Paul, or Monroe, West Monroe. People are going to throw rocks across the river. A river seems to be that common thing that I see.
But don't you see a big disparity in the education system in Bossier as compared to Caddo? I mean, that seems like that's a big stumbling block for Shreveport.
There are different approaches to education with the magnet systems and magnet programs and schools in Caddo Parish compared to Bossier Parish. There's a different approaches to public education. But you have to keep into consideration, Caddo Parish is much more diverse and deals with different issues many times than Bossier Parish does. The city of Shreveport is 4 times the size of Bossier City.
Right.
So there are inherent different challenges in those cities just by the sheer size and the diversity of those cities.
When we had Stephen,
and I'm not looking for an excuse. That's just the reality of it. You put
Right.
any 200,000 population city or near 200,000 population city against a 50,000 population city, and you're gonna see similar things, whether a river divides them or 100 miles divides them.
Right.
When we had Stephen Weigesback from LABI last week, and I sort of quoted a management consultant, Simon Sinek, who said, you got to have a why. And I said, so to Stephen, I said this. I said, so what is Shreveport's why? Is that our biggest problem? And you sort of touched on that a couple of seconds ago. Does Shreveport have a, for lack of a better term, branding problem, an image problem? And how do we overcome that?
I think Shreveport, and I live in Shreveport, and I could live in, and I serve many great communities in North Louisiana, but live in Shreveport. Shreveport, from my perspective, is the capital of the Arklatats. Commercial airport, if you're flying into Northwest Louisiana, you're flying into a city of Shreveport facility. If arts and culture, the predominant player in arts and culture is in the city of Shreveport. Higher education, I mean, there's almost 20,000 students in the city of Shreveport. So it's, you look at the transportation, you look at everything. Shreveport has some very good advantages. You look at health care. There's so many great things about the city of Shreveport that oftentimes get overlooked with the Shreveportitis or people being so negative.
So if I'm putting like a plan together, if I'm putting like a presentation together, I could easily put in your mind Shreveport, untapped potential.
Well, I would say, we've realized some of that potential, but I think many times we've been our own worst enemy and not playing up the positive aspects of Shreveport. I deal with companies from all over the world. Last year we had 8 site consultants that do business with companies such as Boeing, to Harley-Davidson, to IBM in Shreveport and Bossier City. They said the biggest asset was marketing, not just Shreveport, but the region. Because when you market as a region, you bring in everything. You bring in the Barksdale Air Force Base. You bring in.
So you think we could,
Cyber
all of us
Center.
could work together a little bit?
I think you have to work together. And I think if you talk to any person that's engaged in site consulting that does corporate location, they look at it from a regional economy. They're not going to look at it from the city limits of Bossier City or Minden or even Shreveport. They're going to look at it from labor shed. They're going to look at it where they can draw talent. They're going to look at quality of life from a regional aspect and not just myopically into one municipality. And we do regionalism across 14 parishes. We're the only group in the country that covers 2 very distinct MSAs, and we do that to leverage resources. Look, economic development, there's a lot of blocking and tackling that goes on. We spend lots of time collecting data, doing proposals, hosting site visits, and I think we're among the best in the country at doing that. We still have things like every other community in the country to overcome. There's no perfect situation for a company to come into. We've got to mitigate those disadvantages. People talk about General Motors leaving. That was not a good thing, obviously, for the community. But Bentler Steel spent $1 billion in our community. Guess what a new auto plant cost? $1 billion. People keep talking about the General Motors facility being retrofitted into another auto plant. Well, the way they make cars now is so different than they did in 1979 when they started building that first building out of the General Motors plant. You had one platform. Now you may have 5 or 6 different platforms on the same line with the way they build things. So we get caught up too much, I think, in our past and don't look to our future. We need to stop looking in the rearview mirror and start looking through the windshield.